It is so horribly good that my long black dresses will be back in the near future. This is a mandatory listen to anyone who identifies as a woman, by the way. If you don't know about the Cronin core debate, think of it like Britney Spears versus Christina Aguilera. Sofia Gisella is one of those artists that are highly underestimated because you listen to her for the first time and you think to yourself, like, should I be listening to this? Is this too much? And then you realize, no, this is actually perfect. Welcome to your personal music therapy, where I pair pop culture moments with psychology insights. This week's topic is going to be the divide between feminine and feminist pop, and I'm going to be diving deep into different constructs within psychology that relate to that. I'm Hannah. I'm a writer and therapist living abroad. I write articles on Medium where I cover everything from music to psychology as a woman living abroad. And recently, I dropped my first book, Facing Away. If you're interested in the journey of living abroad, moving abroad, and finding yourself abroad, this is a book that I would recommend to you. You can find it linked down below. Here on the podcast, I read my articles aloud with a few fresh reflections and insights along the way. So grab your mug, settle in, and let's get into today's episode. Today's topic is about the division between hyper-feminine and hyper-feminist pop. Femininity and feminism are always going back and forth in repeated cycles, and this is the topic of today's episode. The title of the article will be Hyper-feminine versus hyper-feminist pop. The fifth wave is rolling, meaning the fifth wave of feminism. Femininity in 2026 is a clusterfuck of audible art. As always, the original article will be linked down below, so you can just go over there and read along or make little highlights in order to remember the most important takeaways. This video will have 5 sections. Section 1 is called We Fly High When They Go Low. The second chapter is going to define what hyper-feminist pop specifically is, and I'm going to give you a few examples of current artists and current music that is hyper-feminist. The third chapter is going to be called The Ripples of the Foreshock. Chapter 4 is going to introduce the dichotomy between feminine and feminist. And finally, we're going to go from theory to practice, and we're going to compare 2 important figures. One is Taylor Swift, who's more feminine leaning, and then we're going to have Miley Cyrus as the more feminist leaning example. By the way, she's right there on my new background. I have switched backgrounds since the last videos because I quite literally switched countries. As is a ritual for this podcast, I'm going to be taking on the percentages classes. Let's get into it. Recently, I've seen an amazing trend going around on Instagram, lowering women's voices, but not in the way that you would think. The rhetoric around the female voice in pop music is commonly the higher the notes, the more applaudable. And as a result, karaoke channels pitch up their covers until they get shrieky and beltable. These videos are often pretentiously labeled in a female key. And early stage female singers using this as practice material learn that this high-pitched voice is specifically the female voice. As a speech therapist and overly serious shower singer, I know the difference in vocal cords between men and women. What I critique is not the anatomy, but that for women, the high and breathy and feminine voice is often considered remarkable, even though vocal ranges can be extended in both ways, up and down. The latter actually being more difficult than going up, but somehow culturally it is less marveled over. That is exactly why I love the new down-pitching trend. Female pop voices remained high and breathy for a long time, but it seemed that the public is slowly allowing female voices to build a solid vocal foundation with rumbles and roars and ethereal screams, rather than dooming them to forever sparkle in useless and pretentious heights. Part of the reason that I built this setup the way that I did is because I have these little guys up here. This is Frank, he's a brain. And this is my vocal folds. Not technically mine, but plastic. If you look at this is a voice box. You can see all of the beautiful muscles. You can even take some off if you'd like to. But basically the reason I'm showing you this is to look at the vocal folds that are inside here. For those of you who are thinking this is looking erotic, nope, that's just your anatomy. And these vocal folds actually are not that different between men and women. The only major difference between male and female vocal folds and voice boxes is their size, making them deeper or higher. And then you can also modulate the tension in some of these muscles. Like this muscle can contract and thus can elongate the vocal folds and creating a deeper sound. Same goes for the muscles that are inside of the little hole here in the middle, which is the trachea, by the way. So this is the way towards the lungs. Very excited. Chapter 1. We fly high when we go low. We're clearly living in an age of hyper-femininity where ruffles and visually maximalist branding succeed and the soft feminine receives growing recognition. You can think of brands like Olivia Rodrigo's recent video Drop Dead, and both of these, the feminine aesthetic and the ruffles, often come with high voices. In this landscape of women who are claiming their femininity, pitching down vocals is a very new shift. It is almost like a shift from the feminine to the feminist. The word feminist was beloved in the 2010s and got replaced by femininity in the early 2020s, and maybe, just maybe, we're reaching the peak of how far the pendulum towards femininity will be going. I'm not referring to the 20-year cycle of skirt lengths in public, by the way. This is something that people have actually found in research. There's a 20-year circle of how skirts in public perception are considered to be okay in terms of length. So every 20 years, they will get shorter and then longer again. And this slide basically shows you 3 female icons from the early Hollywood era and how their public image shifted between animus and anima. The pendulum I'm referring to here is something I described in an earlier article already. I'm going to link the podcast episode for that here. And it's the distance between the animus and the anima in the public perception of the ideal woman. The animus and anima concept are part of the subconscious that Carl Jung defined, who was a very famous psychologist from the early 20th century. And he said that there's 2 parts of our psyche, our subconscious, that are male and female, and we act in accordance to those. He didn't say that a woman has only an anima or only an animus. Actually, both genders have both. And it's about the integration throughout life, how you learn to integrate those 2 things together that will eventually move you forward towards becoming a better human. Society has a habit of measuring women up to fictitious models of the women, which is then naturally represented by popular artists, because the audience directs their attention naturally to those who serve as role models. However, the idea of the ideal woman is a very brittle and fugitive one, because androgynous aesthetics might dominate for 1 decade, and the next shift is sugar sweetness, and then the pendulum of the ideal woman keeps going back and forth. With the shift of ideals across the decades comes a change in the usage of the female voice. I already analyzed the different voices across female vocal spectrums by using Wicked. I recommend this episode about Wicked to everyone who is a singer and who wants to improve their voice. And in that episode, I also dove deeper into the history of how women in pop music use their voices across the 5 different waves of feminism. This is also a different episode I'm going to link here. As time moves palpably faster, so does the ideal and lived reality of femininity. With it comes a phenomenon that I lovingly call the forced cohabitation of hyper-feminine and hyper-feminist music on the same algorithm. Chapter 2. What is hyper-feminist pop? The move towards deeper vocal registers goes along well with the rising genre of hyper-feminist pop. This new-ish direction not only focuses on spiky critiques of patriarchy in its lyrics, but it also heavily relies on rough and rumbly voices and deeper registers alongside less airiness in the delivery. One person who does this very well is the aforementioned Dove Cameron. In her last album, Alchemical Volume 1, she had a sarcastic approach to men, specifically in her song Breakfast, and she presented her strength in a song called Lethal Woman. She offered an alternative relationship model in her song Boyfriend. Her new long-awaited album is to be expected later this year, and I'm beyond excited because I view its success and orientation as a possible musical and cultural milestone of this year. Another hyper-feminist musician who is a staple on any feminist playlist is Chinchilla. She's a British singer who has a lead single that I keep coming back to, and it's called Little Girl Gone. And she also has another song that's very famous. It's called Fingers. And both of those are the essence of what I want to hear when I think of a woman in power. I highly recommend listening to Little Girl Gone. It is so well done, and I do not understand why she's not more famous than she is. There's also an American woman who does a lot of feminist pop at the moment. Her name is Iluka, and she has got songs like Wings or Crucify Me that are clearly very feminist coded. Now, the epitome of feminist artists on the rise is probably Sofia Isela, who recently dropped her new album Something in a Shell. It's truly an unapologetic lyrical masterpiece. You might hate her style or you might hate her visuals because she really doesn't adhere to any codes of female aesthetics. You might not like her vocal usage, or you might deem her too out there, which is another name for alternative. That is actually alternative, by the way. Alternative is not a genre in my opinion. But I am willing to bet that she's going to be the talk of the town in just a few months, or maybe 1 or 2 years. I first stumbled upon Sofia Isela through a song called Dull People. It is so horribly good. I think Sofia Isela is one of those artists that are highly underestimated because you listen to her for the first time and you think to yourself, like, should I be listening to this? Is this too much? And then you realize, no, this is actually perfect. The lyrics are actually, they're like a finger in the wound. So I highly recommend listening to Sofia Isela and especially paying close attention to her lyrics because she does something that I feel like not a lot of singers are doing at the moment. Feminist pop is the opposite of the sugarcoat aesthetic from Sabrina Carpenter's Short and Sweet album, which dropped in 2024. And it's the opposite of the showgirl epidemic that happened in 2024 and 2025, which I will come back to that point later. And maybe the most familiar feminist anthem of nowadays is the song Labor. This is a mandatory listen to anyone who identifies as a woman, by the way. And it's by the famous feminist artist and singer Paris Paloma. She also has a new album coming out in September this year. And it's one of those songs where, again, the lyrics are really, really painful, but important, I would say. Chapter 3, The Ripples of the Foreshock. Who dances across your feet at the moment? Is it Sabrina or Olivia or Taylor or maybe Sienna Spiro, who's very new, or maybe Ariana Grande, who's coming out with a new album, or maybe it's Zara Larsson and her pink aesthetic and her crazy eye makeup, which is an extent of makeup that I can never deem achievable for myself. Or maybe you're listening to Pink Panthers. Likely, even if you try to control it, your algorithm is supercharged with a rainbow of colors at the moment. There's likely a lot of glitter and the type of aesthetic that is unapologetically feminine. With the rise of the search term soft feminine in 2020, we ushered in an unapologetic femininity, which I am also celebrating. Womanhood became a tongue-in-cheek move of making jokes about horrible truths that we all know. Current music is based on this common knowledge of abuse cases and unfair paychecks, but often it articulates this inequality through humor. And then 2025 came and the Epstein files. Now, women are showing disdain at those baby doll aesthetics, which I find sad because they're pointing fingers at other female artists wearing baby doll dresses instead of pointing those same fingers at the skyscrapers where the people who actually are the abusers are sitting. As I keep mentioning, I hate women going after women. I just think it's nonsensical, especially if it's women going after women for the cause of being a better feminist or being a better woman. I can't help but wonder, how much longer will it take us to adjust the angle of our anger? How long does it take women to realize that shaming another woman for the fabric of her body or her sexual jokes is blaming the wrong person? I keep saying it and will never miss an opportunity to scream it from the rooftops. The challenge of the fifth wave of feminism is to reunite women so that change can happen. And that is why I think the now small-scale female artists above with their feminist orientation are big voices of the days to come. They are foreshocks for the eventual return of the more feminist rhetoric that's going to come. They're a promise of unprecedented strength by articulating problems through lyrics and sound. Whether it be a lowered vocal line or a female scream, I highly recommend Aurora in this case because she's really good with those female screams, or the song Andromeda from Eurovision by, I don't remember the name of the band, but from the group from Croatia, I believe. This is a really good song. In their lyrics, these women and artists do not joke around anymore. They name the problems and the abuse cases that women are facing. Chapter 4, the feminine and feminist dichotomy. If you take anything away from this article or this podcast episode, let it be this. Female music is not one genre. It is always at its best if it's both light and dark, both hyper-feminine and hyper-feminist, both crone and core. Oh, and by the way, if you're a little bit distracted by my computer, this baby does have a face. It's not just a naked butt. I excuse myself. But it's really cute. You're gonna have to bear with the ass of my sunny angel for today. I love a good sarcastic wordplay, and I love sugar-sweet metaphors with a bit of spice, or I love a well-placed irony. Hell, I really love Sabrina Carpenter. I'm also a fan of Pink Pantheress and her way of portraying introversion as a celebrity, which I think is a new concept. I marvel over Sabrina Carpenter's mind-bending Coachella performance, and I enjoy it when lyrics are interpretable, like sarcastic trapdoors. But there's something ethereal and deeply satisfying in not glossing over the deeply cynical and maybe borderline pessimistic truths of being a woman. Thus, my headphones are also flooded with people like Doechii. I love Mary Jane, a song by Ray on her last album. I love Flip a Switch, which is also by Ray on her last album. And I recommend Aurora because her songs like Running with the Wolves are absolutely amazing. And I love these songs because feminism to me is the ongoing art of moving towards equality as we learn to articulate inequalities. If you don't know about the crone and core debate, think of it like Britney Spears versus Christina Aguilera. These women were measured against each other due to their contrary approaches, which is a repeated dilemma across female history. Some people call it crone and core, others call it light and dark. Feminine, there's also the siren versus goddess, which I think is the thing that they came up with in the early 2020s, and it's a little bit embarrassing because who the fuck is a siren and why the fuck is there a goddess? I don't think we're a generation that's known to believe in gods a lot. And then there's also the good girl versus bitch, which is reiterated across across movies especially. Whatever words we use, we describe the same oversimplified female dichotomy that has ruled the female image for a very long time. And now to chapter 5, we're going to put theory into practice by looking at Miley Cyrus versus Taylor Swift. Two women who clearly have experience in the industry and who act as a barometer for social expectations of women are Miley Cyrus and Taylor Swift. They've been around for a hot minute and they've seen a few switches between crone and core in the public persona of women. Looking at their discography is like a snapshot of what the society in that year wanted of women, either the feminist or the feminine. Miley always leaned more towards the feminist than the feminine, and she ran into trouble because of that several times. She had her biggest success with her album Bangers and songs like Wrecking Ball, or Flowers, which was actually on a different album, or the song We Can't Stop, or Party in the USA. And all of those showed the freedom of a female voice. Her voice is also very deep, her voice is very raspy, which is also part of a condition, like a literal vocal cord condition that she has. So you see these two vocal folds in the middle, right? In Miley Cyrus's case, one of those vocal folds has like a little polyp inside it. Now what the vocal folds are doing when you sing is they basically like clash together. They don't do it like this, they don't clap. It's more of a 3D movement where they move from the back part to the front. In Miley Cyrus's case, this is not a fluid movement because there's a little polyp on one of her vocal folds, which basically causes one vocal fold to keep smashing the other one. And this can be very harmful over time. Basically, you're hurting yourself as you sing, which is the reason that she now tries not to sing stage tours and she's not going on these big concerts because her vocal folds quite literally wouldn't take it. But the problem is that this same little polyp on her vocal fold is also the thing that gives her this special, very Miley Cyrus vocal quality that we all love of her. So Taylor is kind of like the quartz to the obsidian in Miley Cyrus. Taylor leans more feminine than feminist, especially historically, but we know Taylor has eras, and I'm not here to pick a fight with a Swiftie. Okay, Taylor leans more feminine than feminist. Her signature is most obviously visible in albums like Fearless in 2008, or albums like Evermore more recently, or Tortured Poets Department, which are like this elegant, sleek female aesthetic. In the heights of the soft feminine era, but she can also succeed with an album like Red. In other words, Taylor Swift is a little more versatile. She has eras that are popular and that she uses to change herself into the sort of perfect female at that time. The reason Miley and Taylor have resurfaced again and again is not just their musical ingenuity and their ability to reinvent itself. They observe trends and they see and use the chances when their aesthetic shines the best. And because history repeats itself, there will be a day where their branding comes and lands again every few years repeatedly. Exactly when the tides turn from feminine to feminist and vice versa. Knowing this, let me now explain the showgirl epidemic. I will eat a broom, and yes, is a German saying that I'm translating literally because eating a broom sounds very witch-like, so I thought it fit. So I will eat a broom if the following releases were a coincidence. Now stick with me. In 2024, Miley Cyrus won the Grammy for her song Flowers, obviously, and Taylor won the Album of the Year for Midnights. Both were established artists at that time already. The same year, Miley released the song Beautiful That Way for a movie called The Last Showgirl. That's the first Showgirl. In summer 2024, Sabrina Carpenter entered the stage, not because she hadn't been there before, but because suddenly her branding worked. And she entered with her famous album Short and Sweet, which I actually have back there, and I don't know why I didn't put it in the background because it would have been so fitted. Here we go. This one. Short and Sweet. Sorry, Dinah Kroll. There we go. So, Sabrina 2024 released this album, Short and Sweet. This was the resurfacing of this hyper-feminine 50s aesthetic pop. In 2025, a couple months later, Miley released her album Something Beautiful, and she doubled down on a visual album with a glamorous aesthetic that was considered human psychedelics. The same year, Taylor Swift released her album The Life of a Showgirl with the single The Life of a Showgirl, which features the woman herself, Sabrina Carpenter. This album was described as a glamorous gilded fantasy. So can you see how like the human psychedelics and the gilded fantasy are kind of the same marketing model, but from different angles? One of them landed on the right side and the other one didn't. Both of these women, Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus, saw the same trend, but they interpreted it differently through their own branding. But arguably, Miley got the shorter end of the stick as she leaned the wrong way for the 2025 aesthetic. Or the shorter end of the broom, I guess, if we're still talking about witches. I would say her album would have benefited from being paired with a 2026 mastermind like Pink Pantheress or Zara Larsson. Now, for the last chapter, looking into the crystal ball, let's make some predictions. As a long-standing and absolutely freaking biased Miley Cyrus fan and an obsessive lover of music, I predict the following. Miley's next album, according to how she usually releases her music, is likely going to be dropping in 2027 or 2028. And it's going to land smack in the face of the lowering tides of hyper-femininity and the rise of feminist aesthetics, which I think we're currently seeing the early ripples of that as we're like in this hyper pink state that we're slowly moving out of. If Miley Cyrus plays it right, she'll hit another flowers when the tides are turning back from feminine to feminist. Or alternatively, other people that I'm counting on is, for instance, Billie Eilish, who's been huge. Billie Eilish will land another hit album, which basically Billie Eilish always lands a hit album. So this is a pretty safe bet. But maybe this time it will be a hyper-feminist album again. Only time and the right producers can tell. If there's one person that you can safely bet on in the music industry, it's typically this man. Max Martin is, you don't need a crystal ball to know that a Max Martin song will hit. Ask Ariana Grande. But what I'm willing to bet my pink mini skirt on is that my long black dresses will be back in the near future, visually and audibly. So if there's anything I can recommend you in terms of investments for the next few years for your aesthetics or for whatever your wardrobe, I would say you can invest in some more dresses, long dresses. That was it for today's episode. Thank you so much for granting me access to your ears on the Mugcast. If you want to read more from my writing, you can hop over to my Medium, where I'm also writing under Hannah's Café, or you can check out my channels on Instagram or Threads as Hannah's Café. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow the podcast and leave a like and share this podcast with a fellow coffee lover. I hope you had a nice cappuccino with this episode, and I'm sending a warm hug from my mug to yours. Hope to see you soon somewhere else on Hannah's Café. Bye bye!